or like the word journalist? What are the mechanics of your work?
Oh, okay, great. So I can't use my title and I can't use the word journalism.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I have the pleasure of helping to direct an incredible group of community-minded residents of Detroit who happen to work in a newsroom. And they have chosen a theory of change for journalism that centers the information needs of Detroiters. Our beats of reporting, when we think about beats of reporting, if we had an assignment editor, the assignment editor would be the residents of the city of Detroit. And so every 6 months, we poll a group of Detroiters and ask them if they had a journalist working with, a reporter, a reporter.
Wow, got around that one.
Working with them over the next week, what would they have them figure out for them? We also look at public record information like non-emergency 911 calls, calls to United Way, which is a social service agency in Detroit, to see what Detroiters are asking questions about. What are they complaining about? From there, we build our beats of reporting. There's much more in that process. But from there, we build our beats of reporting, which means about every 6 months, those reporting beats might change. They don't change that much because, unfortunately, systemic issues don't change quickly. We run a text-based news service, a SMS service that Detroiters can utilize 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, available in English, Spanish, and Arabic to get information about those high information needs. So for instance, if you lived in Detroit and you wanted to figure out if the landlord who claims to own your house actually owns your house, well, you could put your address into that text system and you can automatically look that up and make sure that you are actually safe. If you need to find the nearest food bank to your house, if you needed to figure out where to get a COVID test, where to get a vaccine, you can put your address in and it'll pull the location closest to you. The reporters in our newsroom check every link. They call every phone number to make sure that when folks call to use that service, it actually works. We do that because we work with people that are in incredibly high cognitive loads. It is incredibly taxing to be in a crisis. And so we are trying to remove some of the burdens that folks feel. We do that as our first level of reporting because 2,000 words does not help you if you're in crisis. You need immediate information to move yourself out of crisis. We also do long-form investigative and accountability reporting, and we happen to be very happy to be the managing partner of Documenters, which I'm sure Darryl will talk about. Oh, you're not going to talk about it? Okay, great. No pressure there. So Darryl and the incredible people that he co-founded City Bureau with run and started a project called Documenters. Documenters are residents that are trained and paid to go to public meetings, city council meetings, water board meetings, police board meetings, and take notes at those meetings. Those notes are then edited by, in Detroit, they're edited by reporters and editors across many newsrooms, and they then become a part of the public record. So if residents wanted to access those notes, if other journalists want to access those notes in order to do any sort of reporting, they have access to them. It is our way of utilizing the community to, one, help us do our jobs, because as we all know, newsrooms are shrinking, they're not growing, but also it allows them to understand the process of reporting. We do a lot of trainings on things like Robert's Rules of Order, how to file a FOIA, and we also have a weekly newsletter that allows Detroiters to get a weekly digest of what's happening at the city government table. I think that's it. There's more. I don't know. I'm a great executive director. Okay, there you go.
If you don't already follow their work, obviously, if that wasn't an intro enough, like I could not recommend the work that they're doing more. And honestly, it's just like not short of inspiring and everything that journalism needs to be doing. Storytelling, something else, replace word for journalism. For me, I sort of introduced myself as the People's Newsroom Director, but really I think it probably makes sense to speak more about the work that we've done at the Bureau Local, which is part of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. The People's Newsroom, we can talk about a bit later. It's a new initiative we're working on that's much more about kind of infrastructure and startup support, but really I think I'm here more to speak to the newsroom work that we do. But I think really to describe it without using that traditional jargon, I think the work we do is community organizing first, and that other word second. It's about building community power. It's thinking about our communities first, how they thrive, and how we can make sure that stories need to be told, the information that needs to kind of get out there. We are an investigative organization, so that does have a very specific way of thinking about it, a specific way of understanding, getting at the root of systemic issues, bringing those to light. But I think largely when we talk about what my role is, I think our work has been about trying to shift this world of journalism into a place of, instead of being gatekeepers, we want to be facilitators. Instead of deciding, we decide what the stories are, and we will decide who tells it and how it's told and the way that in which it's described. And if your voice is a case study or a box out, it's about being a facilitator, simply to use our skill sets and use our tools to kind of lift through as many voices as possible. If anything, we should be simply like the conduits to which our communities tell stories. And so there's a lot about that that's in power shifting, but kind of ultimately, for us, there is an intersection with the kind of terms of DEI work, but it's, at the end of the day, we're really aspiring to that work of belonging, that real work of like newsrooms that genuinely represent people, newsrooms, stories that genuinely make people feel they belong and genuinely feel like it's a positive force in their life. So that's the kind of way in which we kind of work. I know you kind of got in a bit of detail, so I can talk a bit later about an example of exactly how we do an investigation that speaks to all those points, if that's helpful later, but yeah.
Yep, wonderful. Let's get back into that in a little bit. I'm going to circle back to the beginning because I totally forgot to make the connection to the premise of this panel. I wrote a piece in December that was the beginning of this thinking. So thank you for those answers. I'm going to come right back to this. I wrote a piece in CJR in December called Journalism is the Public Good, Let the Public Make It. It begins with a scene in Brazil on a beach in Rio. And I told the story a couple of times because when I first experienced it, it just blew my mind. I was on this beach, looking in the distance. I hear clapping kind of far away, not too close, moving very, very slowly towards me on this beach. Very confused. It wasn't like the, shouting, clapping, like something crazy was happening. It was very deliberate, very intentional. When it got to us, I began clapping too, because, everyone's doing it. I'm in Brazil. I look up, I see a man, a taller man with a small child on his shoulders, and realize as he goes by me that the clapping is following him. So as he walks, the clapping stops where he was, and it starts up where he is. I was totally confused. I was very curious. I asked my friend Nina, from Brazil, from Manaus, what was going on. She basically told me that any time a child is lost on a beach in Rio, this is what happens. An adult volunteers to pick up that child, put them on their shoulders, and they walk the beach, and everyone claps around them so that the parent can find them immediately. And I was just like, wow. That is a very organic, ground-level, bottom-up information system, right? That's an ecosystem that we are a part of as a temporary community, a network on this beach. You could join in, like no effort really required. You can join in with what you have in your hands right then, and you can make real impact right away, right? So I thought about journalism, that other word, that second word, and really how could journalism look more like that? Address direct needs that people obviously say they want. I gotta find my child right now. Who can help me? Not asking, the two, like the lifeguard, which would be great, sure, get the lifeguard involved, but what if we can get the entire beach involved for a couple of seconds as it passes by, right? Much better. Tap the crowd. Have the whole room help you. And what might that look like in practice? Like what pieces do we already have in the ecosystem, infrastructurally, that could get us to that vision in the real world? So that was really the genesis of one, I think this panel, but two, trying to think of where I had been for the last 6 years, creating an organization that runs 3 year-round programs, paying folks to attend public meetings and get information back, training reporters to pair up and do journalism, having these public events around the city. What is the next level of that? How do we dream bigger, imagine bigger? So I'll leave it right there. That was the premise of kind of why I wanted to get in this room and get some amazing folks to just talk through this. All right, come back around. So why should local media outlets co-create with community members as producers, as thought partners, as beyond consumption. What have you seen happen in your work as a result when people are engaged beyond just reading stories, when they're engaged in the production process itself?
Okay. Maybe it's better to give kind of example in this, like kind of one I alluded to earlier. I appreciate that, like, using big words like belonging and facilitation sounds really nice, and then you're like, how does that actually look like in practice? So what we have been trying to do at the Bureau Local is build this in. Our ultimate aim is everything I talked about, everything that we're thinking about in terms of facilitation. But what I love about it, what we do, is that it's not, we're applying it to investigative journalism, which is often seen as like people in dark cloaks and they go down into a bunker and then they emerge and there's this amazing investigation. But it's about how do we bring that into the real world, and one of the mottos of the Bureau is like, how do we make sure our journalism lifts off the page or lifts off the screen and like lives and breathes and like exists in the world. And so for us, investigations have to do that. If you're going to unroot something that's in the dark, if you want to hold people accountable, it doesn't have to come from a kind of lofty space sitting at a desk thinking about what should be done. It should be done with people. You know, your question is, why should people be involved in it? Because it's theirs. Because I believe in the premise of what you said, that this is the public's. This isn't ours. We are simply a facilitator to which people need this to happen. So anyways, to give our example, during COVID, we knew that a lot of people were nervous. We knew that there was a lot of stories that needed to be told. We were in the middle of a big kind of advisory session where we brought an advisory group of people all around the country to dictate the next wave of where we should be going and to write a kind of mandate. And part of that was to ask them sort of what are the stories that you feel need to be told. Now, of course, there was an element that they were nervous about their health, they were nervous about COVID, but really the next question, and almost immediately, and in some cases even more so, was about their jobs. I'm scared about work, I'm scared about making my rent, I'm scared about feeding my children. That's what we care about. So we said, then that's what we need to report on. We allowed that to guide us, and we opened up a news stream on our team, and we called it sort of, is work working? And we simply put the question out, what's not working about work? What needs to be investigated? We know there's a lot of kind of barriers when you think of investigative journalism, that you have to have this whole amazing pitch and this whole amazing kind of concept. But we said, that you don't need to do that. Just tell us a problem. Tell us a problem you're experiencing. And it's our job, as investigative journalists, to turn that into an investigation. And what we had is we had Deliveroo workers come towards that process. So in the UK, there's a company called Deliveroo. It's kind of like Uber Eats. It's sort of courier gig economy app. It's a British company that was kind of being listed. And they basically said, paid nothing. We don't understand how the algorithm works. It changes all the time, and we want to know what our pay is, and we also just believe this needs to be investigated because clearly this can't just be happening to me. So we brought them on, and when talking about how this actually works in practice, we did something very different. We decided that instead of just seeing them as a case study or a source, we designed a program called frontline investigators. So we paid them to be part of the investigative team. So they're not a source, they are investigators. There were 3 delivery riders that were part of this. We trained them up in kind of interviewing techniques. They went out and interviewed other riders, brought other riders to the table. We partnered with a union that had built a kind of app so that people can update and upload their invoices. So we were able to like capture that data point. 300 writers came forward as part of this design by writers, for writers, with writers. 300 writers came forward and shared their own pay data, like their pay slips that they were getting into this thing so that they were getting information back immediately. We provided back to them saying, from what you've shared with us, here's how we understand how your pay is being calculated. But by sharing it with us, we're also gonna be looking at what this looks like overall. It led to kind of a wide-scale investigation. Unsurprisingly, some people were being paid as little as £2 an hour. They were being paid below the minimum wage. This was happening at scale. We ended up producing the first ever kind of the largest gig economy data set by workers themselves, data that wasn't being published by the company. When the company went to publicly list in London, this was a very big moment. We brought the story out, it caused quite a lot of stir. Not only did the share price drop, not only did people kind of step out, but writers came together to protest, to bring their kind of issues forward. There are stories where we helped print them and get them so writers can take their story out to the streets and in different areas. And there was just this real participation. At the end of the day, this was a story by people concerned about something, investigated by them and was for them and for that community. For us, that's a way that you kind of can think about and design it in a completely different way. And for us, investigative journalism does not have to be highly skilled, highly elite, highly privileged people sitting in a room who get the privilege of doing something. It's about sharing and creating new opportunities for the public to own that, to tell it, and to hold people accountable to it.
Well, that's going to be hard to follow, so here we go. I think that in any work that you do, regardless of the industry, the intention that you set to do that work is incredibly important. If your intention is to make revenue, that is what you'll build. You'll build products that make revenue. If your intention is to inform communities, you'll build products that inform communities. I think that too often journalism has done that first part and not that second part. And so when I look at this sign, we were laughing about this sign, no questions from the audience, because I think this is a beautiful example of how journalism has operated in many communities for a very long time. To say that journalism has an ivory tower problem is probably to understate the issue, particularly in the communities like the ones we serve. Detroit has 2 major daily operating papers. It has 2 public radio stations that can be heard in the city, a number of digital startups, and it is still one of the poorest cities in the country. I would argue that journalism is failing Detroiters, and that if we're going to think about what impact means as a journalism organization for Outlier, it means that eventually what we need to answer for are Detroiters' lives better because Outlier exists in this community. And if it is not better, I would argue in 5 years, then I think our funders should stop funding us. That is the impact we are trying to track. Can we actually move this community to something better? I, as a Detroiter, want to live in a high-functioning community. A high-functioning community means that there are information systems that actually work for people to be able to move their lives ahead. We're trying to get people from surviving in the city to thriving in the city. That means that we first have to address that crisis, and then eventually we have to allow for there to be a general audience strategy that really thinks about how do people thrive in that community, how do they connect to that community. For us to believe that as reporters sitting in a newsroom, or the other folks that make our organization run, that we have the answers to that is ridiculous. I'm a lifelong Detroiter. I know Detroit better than I know most things, and I do not have the answers. I don't live in every neighborhood in Detroit. I don't speak every language that every Detroiter speaks. I didn't go to every high school every Detroiter went to. That means that I need their input in order to understand what their needs are. And so that is why we start with that information study. So we can first understand what are the issues of Detroiters who live very different lives than I live, right? If you are a Detroiter who has to catch the bus to get to your job, I get in my car in my driveway and get to work. Your needs, the things that you need to understand around transportation are very different than what I need to understand. I want to know why the governor hasn't filled the potholes yet, right? You need to understand why you're waiting 2 hours for a bus. If I was the person assigning our reporting, I would only write stories about potholes because that's what I see. I would never consider the mother who has to drop her kids off at school and then wait for a bus for 2 hours and make it to her job by 7 a.m. I don't even understand how that works. It's not my life. So what I argue journalism has to do is to remove ego from the process, to stop assuming that we have the answers. I also think that I have been blessed to live in a city that has block clubs. Block clubs, for those who might not have them, are groups of people who organize themselves and advocate for their neighborhood, right? It might be 1 block, it might be 10 blocks. I grew up with a mother who was block club president. And what that taught me about how information travels through communities, I remember when we got our first computer I'm not gonna tell y'all the answer because then you'll know how old I am. My mother said, hey, I think you can make a flyer on that computer. Go make a flyer and tell folks that trash day is changing. And I got on the computer, and I made a flyer in Microsoft Paint or whatever it was called, and put 1,000 clip art trash cans on that flyer.
Clippy, like,
I
don't
was
do it.
very much into clip art. And we printed them out on our dot matrix printer. Now you know how old I am. And handed them door to door. My mother was my first assignment editor. I can see it no differently now. We wrote a newsletter. We didn't have terminology for it. We were just trying to make sure people put their trash out on the right day so we didn't have rats. That was really what she was trying to do. But when I think about that and how that principle, how my mother was making sure her community was informed, I know that people still do that every single day in Detroit. I need to tap into them and give them power. So it is about removing power from newsrooms, handing it back over to the community and asking them to guide us. And then we use our funding and our connections to folks who have a bunch of other resources that they need to get the information that they need to them.
Mm-hmm. I love that. My mother was my assignment editor.
My
I
mother
remember
was
that
my
one for a
first
while.
assignment editor.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to come back in a little bit to this question of any models or systems or frameworks we can share with folks who may be thinking like, how do I shift my newsroom, or how do I create a new newsroom? How do I create a system that allows for this? But first, I want to get to maybe just some challenges. I get this question often when talking about this work, especially from journalists. It's always like, what if the public is bad at journalism? Like, what if they're too biased?
What if journalists are bad at journalism?
Yeah, what if journalists are biased? But it's always from journalists to people like, what if they can't do it? What challenges have y'all come across when involving people in this work, whether it's questions of whatever it may be? Like, what are you seeing?
Well, yeah, I think you've just alluded to some of that, which is journalism and journalists are often the problem for communities. It's not, my colleague Shirish always says, storytelling has been around for thousands of years. Like, this is not a new thing. And actually, it's not a hard thing. The hard thing is just enabling people to do that work. The hard thing is the logistics of making that happen. Having the privilege to be someone who's a journalist who gets to who be paid to do that kind of work. And I don't think we really ever acknowledge how privileged each and every one of us are, that this is the thing that we get to do. When in reality, as you say, it's not difficult to tell stories, and people have told stories historically. So if newsrooms got out of their own way, and if journalists got out of their own way. But I think the biggest challenge we've been seeing, so I've just talked about the Beer Local, but the People's Newsroom is our kind of initiative now to try to support, how do we support people to tell their own stories and build their own platforms and to kind of bring in the next wave of newsrooms. And what we've been finding with that is, as you can imagine, the existential crisis that we think is facing is trust. And it isn't this thing of, well, why can't they trust us? It's, why is it that we haven't been able to be trusted, right? And it's why, as an industry and as a sector, those things are happening. Again, my wonderful colleague Shirish says, all newsrooms kind of say, how can we build trust in news? And he's like, it's pretty simple, just do trustworthy things. It's like any relationship, think about any dynamic. If it's built from extraction, if it's built from taking, if it's built from exploitation, if it's built from scapegoating, which a lot of kind of journalism can be, why else do you think that trust isn't there? So what we see often is that a lot of communities that we work with, we are prioritizing those who've been traditionally marginalized by the media. How do we support and make it easier for them to start their own newsrooms? That's the kind of next piece of work that we're doing. And what you see time and time again, journalism is the problem, it's not the solution. We think of it as like, we know the power that it has and what it can do, but in so many cases, they open a newspaper with fear, with being scared of being from a Muslim community and seeing the way that they've been reported in the media, but being a trans or non-binary person and seeing the way that has been kind of lashed against them over the past several years. These are things in which they see the world of journalism, and that is a huge thing. So one is trust, and it's about how we show up, keep showing up, keep showing up, how we give back, and actually how we make, as you were saying, actually make journalism useful, actually something kind of good. But one of the other things that we've found in the process of supporting people to do that is people also need healing. And I know that sounds very soft and very funny, but like actually in the experience of this, like we often go in and people just need to talk about this. They need to actually say they have historically harmed, the news has historically harmed our community. We don't have nothing to do with it. Their association of journalism is kind of everything that's wrong with the world. And so we have to let that out. We have to name it. Like with anything, you need to name the problem before you can solve it. You let that out, you kind of let that be there. And then there's a process of sort of healing and reimagining. What could journalism be? What are the stories that we need to tell? What is it our community needs to build power? And then we start to build it. And it takes that, all those processes have to happen before we're able to even work with the newsroom work with a community that wants to be able to tell stories. And they're not jumping up and down to build their own newsrooms. This was an assumption that I started at when I kind of came in thinking people want to set up newsrooms. And my colleagues have kind of said, no, actually they don't. No. But they do want community power, and that's what we are focused. That's why we do community power first, kind of journalism second.
Darryl will be happy. By show of hands, how many of you all have found yourselves as exhausted as you've ever been over the last 2 years? Okay. So imagine that exists for the people that you serve, right? Imagine that has been true for much more than 2 years. I think that often newsrooms want to develop strategies for involving communities that are taxing, that are more exhaustive than the actual issues they're already dealing with. And so you have to really understand where your community is, and healing is actually an important part of journalism. Care is an important part of journalism. And so the first thing is understanding the health of your community. Where are people existing, and how much can they actually give to you? And how do you make it really easy for that process to exist, and how do you make it a loop that is good for everybody, where not only are you asking something of them, but they actually get something back in return? And I think we can talk about a great example. I think one of the best examples I've seen of this is Oakland Side. So Oakland Side is a new publication in Oakland, California. And they have a community advisory board, or actually a community review board, basically, of community members that review their journalism on a set schedule and give them feedback. Those folks are paid for their work, so we appreciate your talents and skill sets, but it also allows the newsroom to understand what residents are gaining and not gaining from the reporting that they're doing. But I'm also going to answer it from the point of view of where I actually work, and that's from the fundraising and money side. And I think about this a lot, how the business model of journalism impacts the actual reporting that we do. And I think that it would be insincere for me to not say that I think when we consider who we take money from, our communities are watching that. And I say that as a person who has taken money from some folks that I have not felt comfortable with, right? And in the spirit of full transparency, even though this is being live streamed, okay, Jesus. We've taken money from Meta. I don't know if that is the right choice for Detroiters. And I don't know if eventually Detroiters will push back on us because of that decision. But also, this is a really hard organization to fundraise for. And that $150,000 was incredibly valuable. And we did really good work with that. But I do think that eventually we do have to ask how we fund journalism, how that impacts how our communities see us. And I do think that increasingly that is going to become more and more of an issue.
Mm-hmm. So many thoughts here.
And so much lost revenue.
I want to see how much time we have. Should we try the pair share?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Okay. So one thing, just Megan, in response to what you were saying earlier, reminded me of this group in Chicago called Just Action Coalition. They laid out 3 points around how to build equity in an organization or a community, and it was acknowledge history, embrace accountability, and shift power. And when you were talking, I was just like checking off each box, just like the care, the healing, understanding the history of what your newsroom may have done in the past or what you may be still doing needs to change, and saying that, yes, that is correct, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z to change that, and really shifting power. How are we democratizing our skills, what we have, our resources, and spreading it, being a part of our ecosystem in the community? Anyway.
And Darryl, can I just say,
yeah.
And not only what our newsrooms have, so for those of us building new newsrooms who might not have a history of harm, we are still dealing with, people don't see us any different. They have no idea that the Free Press and the Detroit News are different organizations. They truly do not know. And so not only are we dealing with harm that we possibly have done. We're also just dealing with the ecosystem, which is why we have to have an ecosystem approach.
Right.
It is not enough for Outlier to do good journalism. It is enough for every organization to have a change theory, or else this won't work for us, right? People will say journalism is harmful. Media is harmful. How many of us have had that happen? You've been sitting at a dinner with your family, oh, the media, right? And I'm like, no, but we're not that media. It doesn't matter to them. They don't know the difference. And so if other journalism organizations are not getting in the game, all of us are going to fail together, which is why we have to be in a spirit of checking people all the time. You have to stay checking folks. You got to really hold them accountable, like as an ecosystem approach.
Perfect segue into opening this up. I want to try a little pair share activity, folks. I'm going to get to questions at the very end, I promise. Despite what the paper says, we're doing a Q&A. Can we maybe set up? I'll put up 5 minutes to just turn to your neighbor, meet a new person, 2 or 3 people, and answer this question together. What's something that people in your community can do better than people in your newsroom? And if you're not in the newsroom, if you're part of the community, what's something that people in your community do better than people in your newsroom? Your local newspaper, your radio station, folks in your community, what do they do better? What can they contribute to a newsroom? Can we try it? 5 minutes? Meet a new person, say hey, names. I'm gonna ask you to share out in a minute.
That's great. I love that question. I love those questions. And now I'm like really thinking about it, like, dang, like everything, raise money. Let me tell you something. I was watching like those, the community care groups that popped up during COVID, like resources. They were pulling down, like, they were like, people need food. We got 52 pounds of food right now. I was like, y'all just asked for it this morning. Like, that's incredible. I asked for $52, it'll take me 2 months to get it. Oh, I get now why they were like, no, don't do it. This is awesome. I love it. I hope somebody's watching the live stream and just frustrated.
Oh, you could probably have hot mics, by the way. Hot mic.
Oh, yeah.
Probably still on.
I think this has been good.
I want to share on part 2. Like, hit me.
I know, I can't wait because I'm going to be like,
I know, I just want to see like a lot of people like really nodding. Like,
yeah. I can't wait to hear what folks, because I bet you there are going to be things I'm like, dang, we should be doing that. Yeah.
How do we want to end it off? We'll do, I figure we could do a share out, good 5 minutes of Q&A, probably 2 or 3. And I want to leave it for us, maybe to give a final word.
Sure.
Do you want to plug anything or like give any piece of advice or like?
Yeah, sure. I can plug. I don't have anything. I don't.
No, I'm trying to think.
Like I've been at the end of a podcast. You got any? Yeah, I got a show in Wisconsin next week. I do not.
Yeah, my SoundCloud.
This is my SoundCloud, where I make raindrop beats. You know.
There we go. Yeah.
Save that one question around like if you don't have particular advice like models or framework that you might like somebody wants to pressure their newsroom into being better or to change a newsroom, what kind of system or tool?
Punch him in the throat.
Just
Like we really got to start. I told you we got to start fighting. we really need a Fight Club theory of change.
yeah.
Fight Club here. No, your point about the ecosystem is just so true.
I'm like, I'm doing all of this and what, like,
I mean, that's why we're
we
building
can fail
infrastructure,
because somebody else, right? Like
Right.
somebody else won't get right.
Yeah.
That's wild, right? Like if I think, like I'm actually, maybe I'll go back and study this. When, what's the Mexican restaurant? Okay, I say that loosely. Not Qdoba, the other one.
2 minutes.
What's the Mexican restaurant? Not Qdoba, Chipotle.
Oh, Chipotle.
So like when Chipotle had that E. coli, multiple E. coli catastrophes, I wonder if that impacted other restaurants
Oh, other
where people
burrito
got
places.
sick, right? So like that's the theory I'm working with, right? Like if your restaurant has bad health standards, it's bad for all of us. Like if there's a restaurant on a block that has an F rating, I can't imagine that's great for the rest of the block. Or maybe
Right,
it's
so
good.
it's
I don't
like,
know.
I got sick, I got food poisoning from a burrito, and then they found out, then it was like, people are gonna be like, I'm
It's
not
the
gonna eat
burrito.
burritos.
It's the burrito.
All ships rising thing. It's like
Exactly.
the same thing is true, but you can sink all of our ships with like something.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
For
I mean,
sure.
it's the example of like, everyone always likes to say one bad apple, but the end of the actual phrase is that it rots the whole bunch. People don't finish
always
the
forget the
sentence.
line, yep.
They
And
hate
it's like, it rots the whole bunch.
Yep.
We're all in trouble.
Always forget that
Yeah.
line. They always
Yeah, that's right.
And I really want to know how that happened. Because someone like chose to take it.
We do that all the time, though. Like, I find that often quotes are cut off, and like the most important part is cut off.
Yeah.
I'm like, y'all, but the last 5 sentences were kind of important. Yeah. That's where he.
Everyone quotes MLK. It's like, the rest was the part.
Yeah. It's like, oh,
Where he said y'all were trash.
Yeah. Yes, he had a dream, and
And it was
all
like,
this other
also that speech was 25 minutes long.
that was so good. I love when you were like holding that up. It was like, it was written for us.
It was like, I was like,
I'm like, I've been in other sessions where they've asked. I love how I also wanted to some guy at the back just like, mine's just like blown.
what is happening?
First they wanted to sit in the front.
It's too much. It's
we
too
go.
much change. Yeah.
all right. That was 5 minutes. Bring it home. Bring it back. Wrap it up. Winding it down. I'm gonna do that thing where like you hear.
No, do
clap
it.
twice.
Don't do a preschool
I'm
teacher.
not gonna do it. I'm not gonna preschool y'all. Can I get a volunteer? Anyone from your group who wants to share what y'all were talking about?
From one group?
him to share.
Yeah, we're gonna
This
do
guy's
a few.
volunteering for you.
We're gonna do a few. Who's the first person who wants to share out what your group talked about? Yeah, I see somebody in the back. Everyone
You
here?
might want to maybe stand up.
Right, yeah, we're just talking about how the public can sort of open your eyes to aspects of stories or aspects of what's going on that you might have missed as an organization. So, for example, if the guys in the newsroom, the aid, they might not have the experience to point out or to appreciate some of the problems that guys in our demographic might pick up. So, for example, reporting on exams, where if in your newsroom is people without kids, they might not pick up on concerns that parents might have. But I think there was also a question about handing over over the airwaves to the public, whether that's actually always a good thing. And to think about what happens on social media or Twitter, Facebook. And I don't think it's always that trusting the public always gives you the outcome.
Right. Thank you. I'll do a quick repeat for folks. If there's basically, it was just saying that the public can open your eyes to different aspects of life that might not be already in your newsroom. Maybe you don't have senior citizens in your newsroom, but folks in your community could tell you that actually, hey, the bus line is actually really important to me. I can't get to the laundromat, whatever it may be. People have children, especially mothers. Like, if you don't have those folks in your newsroom, are you missing out on certain perspectives? Right? Can we do maybe one more? Anybody else want to share what they talked about in their group? I see you. Yep, this is you.
I'm Kevin Grant from the Drawing Two Project. This is Kyle Hope from Columbia Journalism Review. He lives in New York. I live in Washington, D.C. And we were talking about how the average member of the public in either of our cities knows more about just about every beat than the journalists who are mostly covering national beats for this national audience.
Yeah.
So the community wins on almost every time.
Yep. And I'll repeat that one too. Basically, the public always knows more about what you're covering than people in your newsroom because they're living it, right?
It's that kind of age-old thing that like, it's not actually news to the people who the story is about. They've been experiencing it and living it. It's just news to people who didn't know about that issue, right?
Right.
Like, these things are happening to people all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Can we do one more? They're gonna be mad. No.
Probably not. No.
No. Okay, we're shutting it down. We're shutting it down. If y'all want to talk later, I'm more than happy to. We're gonna.
We'll do a session later.
It's for the kind of broadcasting and accessibility issues. They just want to make sure that they're hearing everything. So that's why. Yeah.
So just bring people up. We got 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, I think we,
Okay.
You still need to get to questions.
What's that?
You still need to get to questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone have questions for us?
Yeah.
I'm going to end. So yeah, you were ready. All right. I'm gonna. No, let's do it now. Yeah.
Ooh, so this is what I consider to be one of the most powerful pieces of documenters. Anybody can become a documenter. If you're between 16 and in whatever, you can become a documenter. If you have been to college, if you've not been to college, if you work an hourly job, if you work a wage job, if you work in a city, if you work, or you live in a city, maybe you work in a city, and so you care about the city in that way, right? There is really few barriers to access, right? And there are people, and Darryl can say this, I'm sure it's true in Chicago too, who do the trainings but never decide to take notes at a meeting.
Yep.
They just want to be in community with people. They want to learn a new skill. They want to meet new people. And I think that, for me, and that's why I always say the documenters are a self-organizing group that we just raise money for. They are their own crew. They do their own thing. We help with the editing and the money raising. And so in that way, that is their connection. So you have to build programs, and it might not be documenters for you, but when you're thinking about how to build programs in your newsroom, what are the barriers to access for people to join, right? Like if it requires you to always show up in person, that is going to eliminate some people from ever participating. So is there ability for people to participate in other ways? You know, does it always have to be about the work of the newsroom? We used to, before COVID, host these bi-weekly coffee and tea sessions where we said, hey, we're gonna pop up at a coffee house on a different side of the city every time we met at a different coffee house. You can come in and just get a free cup of coffee and never talk to us. Or you can come and sit down at the table and we can talk about anything. And there were people who came and talked to us about the work that they do, projects they were starting, organizations that didn't really have anything to do with the work that we did, but it gave us an understanding of that community. What were people building in that community? What gardens were they planting? What were they excited about in the neighborhoods that they lived in? And there were people who walked in, got a cup of coffee, said thank you, and walked back out. And that's good enough. They now remember us, they have some connection to us, so eventually maybe when they see our names again and they actually have a reason to connect with us, it'll give them a reason to do that. So it's all about creating multiple routes to connection, but also routes that are easy for people to form communities within.
I would just add one thing to that, which is I think we think a lot about, this has come up a couple of different times around, well, will that create an echo chamber or will that polarize it from other things? And to be totally honest, that's the existing landscape. The existing landscape is an echo chamber. It is run by an elite and a very specific group of people. So we should be asking these questions of existing legacy media. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it for our community groups too, but as you can see, like as is just indicated, a lot of as long as that design is truly about the community, which it is, and that's what's being centered in, it will bring that breadth. But I think it's funny because I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think we've had this from other people where they sort of see it as like positioning this, serving these marginalized groups is like seen as this kind of combative separate space or whatever it is, when instead of actually recognizing that the existing space is this very niche actual group of people who it's serving and who it is, that's the echo chamber that we need to break open. And these projects are trying to actually do that in a different way. So I think, as you're right, we need to ask that and hold ourselves accountable at a community level, but we also need to be asking that of legacy media as well. Yeah.
I'm so sad because there's a session happening right now that I'm missing.
Oh, well, don't
so
let
sorry.
me stop you.
Actually, I'm going to leave now and just catch the last 5 minutes. But there's a session right now, the title is Underrepresentation is Misrepresentation.
Yes.
When I saw that, I was like, exactly, right? Like because we're looking at the landscape and assuming again that it's healthy. For some people, this is an incredibly healthy information system. Arguably, for most of the people sitting in this room, you are over-informed. There is so much information targeted towards you that you often feel like, please stop informing me. I don't need to know anything else, right? Think about the opposite of that. Think about what it felt in those first weeks of COVID. What mask should I wear? Should I wear a mask? Should I be washing my groceries off? For a lot of us, the very first time we were ever in an information crisis was March of 2020. For many of the people that we serve and that we never consider in our newsrooms, they live in that same information crisis every single day. And so it's not enough for us to think about, what you were just mentioning, like, our people. No, inform folks. Just do the work. It will land where it needs to land, but you have to be intentional about doing it.
And for anyone who didn't hear that initial question, I'll just repeat it just in case we go back. It was really around connections between community, how to get around feeling like you are or feel like you're working in a bubble, and struggling to bring communities together. Do we have time for one more? Anyone have like a super burning question? Like, you got to ask that question. You're so close to. Say it to the record.
Thank you. Jonathan from the UK. From the start, you've been trying to not use the word journalism. And you're talking about this practice, which is like journalism in many ways, but is also like radically unlike journalism as it's been practiced. And we talk about information systems and social knowledge and, and the difficulties of fundraising and talking to our friends and families about what we do and not alienating. Is there a need for a new word? Is this a new thing that needs a new word?
You're not my favorite person in this room.
What is the word?
I say all the time, I don't care if people ever call us a newsroom. I don't care if they call it journalism. I care that the intention is met, that we set to do something and we do it. And if people don't consider that, let me start at the beginning. When we first started going in front of funders and other power brokers in journalism, they were like, oh, is that journalism or is that advocacy? And when I was just a youngster doing this work, which was 3 years ago, I was like, oh, well, okay, maybe, we need to be careful. I'm no longer careful. I don't care what you consider it. It actually doesn't matter to me. And I don't know if we have a word yet. We use a lot of different words to describe what we do.
This question is very active in...
Very active. I don't know. And maybe the session we propose next year will be, let's rename journalism. Yeah. Because we are trying to break it. I think we are, I don't think I'm misspeaking when I say we want to break what exists currently. It is meant to be disruptive. It is meant to make people feel tense. It is meant to make people walk into a room and say, is this journalism? I now like that question, but I don't know what you call it quite yet. And if you come up with it, I will owe you for life, but not money, because I don't have it.
You want to take it?
Well, no, I was just going to say, the way we're playing with it is the community power kind of word, and like that's the moment where we've landed to try to describe it is like we just want to support people to build that power in their community, and journalism happens to be the output. We still end up using that word journalism. Even when we were deciding People's Newsroom, we were really nervous about that word newsroom, but we felt like we needed to have some piece of it in there. But I think, as you say, you're seeing a lot around kind of information needs. You're seeing kind of storytelling is something that's always gets people a bit like, I don't know what it is,
I get
but
that way
people
about that
just,
too sometimes. Narrative. It's like, what is that?
yeah.
What is it?
So if any, I mean, but that might be a good call for like a piece of homework for everyone in this room. If like, you know, have a conversation with friends, family, people outside, importantly, outside the sector, and ask them to describe, like, I've done this with friends that don't work, like, what is a piece of news, journalism, story, anything, like, what is something that was actually, you think actually had an impact, actually changed something in your community? Describe it to me, like, try to kind of do your own user research. And if anyone comes up with some good language, like DM us, or like we can start a thread and do it, because I think this is an ongoing.
But you want to go off? We got 30 seconds.
Okay, and you know what's very interesting to me too? Because we're talking to local funders now, and they always say to me, oh, we don't fund journalism. So actually, I probably need to stop using the word journalism. Oh, we don't do journalism, actually. We do, I don't know, something else. So actually, I might stop using journalism altogether. Thank you.
I'll introduce one thing briefly. Is I like thinking about our work as civic infrastructure these days. I think journalism skills are civic skills, right? And there's a big gap in terms of like our civic knowledge, civic action, civic engagement. So journalism as civic action, as civic engagement is where I've been gravitating for. A piece of the puzzle. But yes, it's unfinished. That question is, I think, very live, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it. We're at time. I want to make sure we get out on time. I really wanted to make sure, like, there's just the goals around this session, that we endorse media models that involve people in the production of local information, like alongside or with journalists. Talk to some of the mechanics involved in making these systems, so like challenges, successes, and really imagine a more equitable future for local news. So I hope we get some of that. We only got an hour. Can we do any quick plugs, any quick advice, and your Twitter handle so people can find y'all? Whichever.
Yeah.
Anything to plug, any advice?
Media_outlier is our Twitter handle. Mine is @Candy, CANDE 313.
Yeah, I'm Megan_Lucero, and I think what we'll do is we'll just share. I really want you to read the pieces that they've written about this, so I'm going to share those today. So make sure you just check that out, because you need to read what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. And you can follow me Twitter D_HOLLI. I'd love to talk more about this. I'll wrap up so that we can get off on time, but find me, we're around. Love to talk more. Thank you, everybody.
I got to get a picture of that.